I remember the exact sound the glass made when it slipped from my mother's hand. A thin, sharp crack against the kitchen tile. For a second, I thought she'd simply dropped it. Then I looked up and saw tears running down her face. My mother, the woman I had never seen cry in 43 years. And the worst part? The document lying on the table between us. Because that single sheet of paper proved something I wasn't prepared to believe. The strongest woman I knew had been living with a secret for decades. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Frank Hale. I've spent most of my life believing that people reveal themselves through paperwork. Receipts, contracts, signatures. Those are the places where truth hides when words start lying. And that afternoon in my mother's kitchen, the truth was sitting in front of us in black ink. But before I explain that moment, you need to understand the kind of woman my mother was. Growing up, I thought she was indestructible. Not in the heroic movie sense. She didn't shout. She didn't make speeches. She simply handled things, quietly, efficiently, the way someone does when life has trained them not to expect help. Our house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent every morning. My mother was always up before sunrise, the kitchen light already on when I came downstairs as a kid. There would be toast on a plate, sometimes eggs, sometimes just a piece of fruit and a glass of milk. She never made a big deal about it. "Eat before you go," she'd say, sliding the plate toward me. And that was it. No speeches about responsibility, no lectures about school, just quiet routines. When I was 12, our refrigerator broke. I remember because it was July and the heat made the whole house smell like melting plastic and spoiled food. My mother opened the fridge, looked inside, and said calmly, "Well, that's not ideal." I expected panic. Well, instead, she unplugged it, wiped the shelves, made a few phone calls, and by the evening, a used refrigerator from a neighbor's cousin was already humming in the kitchen. "Problem solved," she said. That was my mother. When I was 16 and got into a fight at school, she didn't scream. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked one question. "Did you win?" I stared at her. I guess?" She nodded once. "Good," she said. "Next time, try not to need to." And that was the entire lecture. Strength in our house wasn't loud. It was quiet, controlled, steady. The only thing she never talked about was my father. If I asked, she'd say the same line every time. "Your father made his choices, we made ours." When I was younger, I thought it meant he'd left. When I was older, I realized it meant something more complicated. But I didn't push. My mother had raised me alone, worked 2 jobs, paid off the house, and somehow still managed to show up at every school event. You don't interrogate someone who's carried that much weight. Or at least, I thought you didn't. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I had stopped by the house to bring her a new coffee machine. The old one had been making that wheezing sound appliances make right before they die. "Frank, I told you I don't need a new one," she said when I set the box on the counter. "You also told me the last one was perfectly fine, while it sounded like a lawnmower," I replied. She gave me that look mothers give when they know you're right but don't want to admit it. "Still works," she muttered. "Not for long." She smiled, small and tired, and started unpacking the machine. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon bread. She had been baking earlier. The windows were open and the curtains moved slightly in the breeze. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then she opened the envelope. It had arrived in the morning mail. Thick paper, official seal. She frowned when she saw the return address. Official seal. "What is it?" I asked. "Probably some tax nonsense," she said. She pulled out the document. At first, she didn't react. Then her fingers tightened around the page, and the glass slipped from her other hand. That was the moment the sound of breaking glass filled the kitchen. I stood up immediately. "Mom?" She didn't answer. She was staring at the document like it had just insulted her personally. "Mom?" I repeated, walking closer. "What is it?" Her voice came out quiet. I don't understand." That sentence alone was strange. My mother always understood things. I picked up the paper. The first line read, "Property Ownership Review. Claim Dispute." I frowned. "What is this?" My mother finally sat down in the chair, slowly, like the air had suddenly become heavier. "I thought this was settled," she whispered. "Settled how?" She looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid. "Frank," she said softly, "do you remember the old storage shed behind the house?" I blinked. "Of course." "Your grandfather built it." "Yeah?" She nodded. "Well, apparently someone thinks the land under it belongs to them." I frowned again. "That doesn't make sense. You own this property." "That's what I believed." She pushed the document toward me. "Look at the signature." I looked down. The page was a copy of a land transfer agreement, and at the bottom was a name. My father's. Except the date on the document was from 15 years after he supposedly disappeared. For a moment, the room felt strangely quiet. I read the line again. "Transfer of property rights authorized. Signed, Daniel Hale." My father. I swallowed. "Mom, how is that possible?" She shook her head slowly. "I buried your father 26 years ago." The sentence hung in the air like a crack in the ceiling. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I looked closer at the page. Another signature sat beside my father's, and when I read that name, the cold started in my stomach. And because the second signature belonged to someone else entirely. A man named Victor Rains. My mother saw the realization on my face. "Yes," she said quietly. "That Victor Rains." I leaned back in the chair. Victor Rains wasn't just some random name. He was a real estate developer who had been buying property around our town for years. And suddenly, the situation made sense in a way that made my teeth grind. "Someone's trying to claim this land," I said slowly. My mother nodded. "But the problem isn't the claim," she said. "The problem is that document." I tapped the signature. "This is fake." She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that made my stomach tighten. "I'm not sure it is." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in that kitchen before. "Mom," I said carefully, "what are you not telling me?" She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, the strong woman I'd always known looked suddenly tired. "There's something I never told you about your father." I leaned forward. "Start talking." She inhaled slowly. "Your father didn't disappear," she said. "He ran." The words landed hard. Ran from what? She looked at the document again. From him, she said quietly. Victor Rains. And just like that, the story of my childhood started rearranging itself in my head. But the worst part? That was only the first layer. Because 3 days later, when I went to the county records office to pull the original documents, I discovered something that made the situation far worse. The land transfer wasn't just signed by my father, it was notarized. And the notary stamp belonged to someone I knew. My own business partner. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a mistake, it was a plan. And the target wasn't just my mother's property, it was everything my family had left. For the next 2 weeks, I started digging. Paperwork, records, old property filings. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. Property filings. Victor Rains had been trying to acquire the land around our neighborhood for years. Most people sold. My mother never did. Which meant the only way to take the property was to prove she didn't own it. And that fake signature? It was the key. The first confrontation happened in my partner's office. I dropped the document on his desk. Explain this. He looked at the page, then at me, then back at the page. And the man had the nerve to smile. Frank, he said calmly, you're overreacting. I leaned forward slowly. Am I? He leaned back in his chair. That document is legitimate. My father was dead. So I've heard. The way he said it made my jaw tighten. You notarized it. Yes. You watched someone sign my father's name. He folded his hands. Frank, he said quietly, some things are more complicated than they appear. That was when the truth hit me. He wasn't denying it. He was admitting it, just carefully. You're working with Rains. Business opportunity. You forged a dead man's signature. He shrugged. I verified the signature presented to me. The calmness in his voice made something inside my chest go cold. Do you have any idea what you've done? He smiled again. Oh, Frank, he said. I think you're the one who doesn't understand what's happening. He turned the document toward me. You see this clause? I read it and felt the air leave my lungs. Because the transfer didn't just apply to the shed land, it applied to the entire property, including the house, which meant that if the document held up in court, my mother would lose everything. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the paperwork. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The coffee in front of me had gone cold hours earlier. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to panic. Because the system believed documents. And right now, the documents were lying. But paperwork cuts both ways. If someone builds a lie with paper, you can destroy it the same way. Builds a lie with 3 days later, I found the one record Victor Rains had overlooked. An old land survey, signed and filed by my grandfather. And attached to it was something even better, a witness signature from the same notary who had stamped the fake transfer decades later. Which meant the timelines didn't match, which meant the signature verification process had been violated, which meant the entire transfer could be thrown out. The final confrontation happened in the courthouse. Victor Rains stood at the front table with 2 lawyers and the same confident expression he'd probably worn during 100 other property disputes. My mother sat beside me, quiet, hands folded. the same way she had always handled pressure. When the judge asked for evidence, I slid the folder across the table. The courtroom went silent as the documents were examined. 10 minutes later, the judge looked over his glasses. "Mr. Rains," he said calmly, "this transfer cannot be verified under the timeline provided." Rains's smile faded. The judge tapped the page. "This document is invalid." And just like that, the entire scheme collapsed. Outside the courthouse, my mother stood quietly beside me. "You handled that well," she said. I shrugged. "I learned from you." She smiled slightly, but before we got in the car, she looked at the courthouse doors. "You know," she said, "your father always believed paperwork would destroy him." I frowned. "And did it?" She shook her head. "No," she said. Then she looked at me. "Paperwork saved us." I think about that moment sometimes, about the sound of the glass breaking on the kitchen floor, about the first time I saw the strongest woman I knew cry, and about the piece of paper that almost destroyed everything she had built. Because in the end, strength isn't about never breaking. Sometimes it's about standing up, even when the evidence says you shouldn't be able to. But I still wonder about one thing. If you found a document that could destroy your entire family, would you fight it, or would you walk away before you learned the truth? I'm curious what you do. Let me know.